teachers, which position did a pupil ever put you in that was the most uncomfortable? Story 1. A 15-year-old freshman sent me a photo of herself in underwear along with the message, "What can I do to get in?" I gave it over to the administration because I had to defend myself. Her parents' encounter with her was quite uncomfortable. I received the image through email from her. Her parents, who weren't awful parents, were horrified. She was a very confused child who, in my opinion, received the support she needed. Story 2. I had a male model, like P instructor, who had to start dressed inappropriately and foregoing shaving in order to get females to stop giving him notes for injuries and quit hanging out with him. Story 3. After school, a 9th grade student from my global history class came to my classroom to create a test. As I glanced up after she sat down across from my desk, I saw that her shirt was undone nearly all the way down to her waist. She was wearing a scarf, so she seemed ordinary at first sight. But before she entered my classroom alone herself, she unbuttoned her top nearly completely. For a split second, I really believed that the school may have paid her to assess my moral character as a male instructor. Story 4. 2 female students requested to use the toilet, and I complied. The girls said they didn't return till class was ended. When one of them was taking a pregnancy test, they headed to the restroom. That was a success. I congratulated them and then advised them to meet with the school nurse or counselor. Many have inquired, and the girl did choose to retain her child. That same semester, her boyfriend's baby's father was detained. I have no clue how long he was in prison. He also attended my class. I never saw him again, so I know he wasn't freed that semester. The year after she graduated, I bumped with my former student again when she was working at a nearby fast food restaurant's drive through cash register. Story 5. When I teach English in Germany, precise translations might sometimes lead to issues. I once had a student ask me why she couldn't say "I creamed my pants" as we discussed going to the beach. Now, in German, you say ice cream, or more accurately translated ice cream myself, to signify that you apply sunscreen. Because of this, a friend of hers who was a native English speaker made the joke that she would never be able to say in English, "I creamed my pants," without explaining why. Thus, she demanded information from me, her English instructor, in front of the class. I obviously became quite upset and requested for an early break. This brings to mind a time when a male student, "I'm a woman," asked me what a job was. He was only asking a straightforward question, and I do educate pupils with intellectual challenges. I advised him to ask his mother since I didn't think it was proper for me to respond. In retrospect, maybe not the wisest thing to say. I can only speculate as to what he said. "Mom, hello, Mrs. This is Windmill. You to inquire as to what a decent employment entails." Story 6. A few years back, one of the girls requested if she may use the restroom during class, which left my English instructor in a really awkward position. Naturally, he said after a little pause. She raised her hand again 5 minutes later, and my instructor said, "I'll write you a pass now." The girl then said, "Never mind." It entered again. My teacher's expression was fantastic. Story 7. The student made me feel trapped by his iPod cable and then failed to write. One of my really attractive guy pals is a math and science teacher. He's one of those evil persons who enjoys making math entertaining. And to be really honest, his courses are like a show. While it's lovely, many of the female students in the class merely chuckle and inquire about his relationship status. He continued avoiding them and focused on making the lesson enjoyable, but they eventually became hostile toward a quiet female he was paying too much attention to. He offered her some additional work after class that he believed she'd like since she was truly interested in arithmetic. He firmly put his foot down and requested a parent meeting with all the girls in question. He told them up front that he didn't deserve to be subjected to borderline sexual harassment while working, and that they could either behave like adult people or leave. The majority of the parents were just ashamed that their daughters would act in such a manner, but a few said things like, "It's a compliment," etc. Admin, fortunately, was on his side. The issue I don't comprehend is that when you say, "Hey, this makes me uncomfortable," someone yells violently that you should take it as a praise rather than offering you an apology. Well done for advocating for yourself, hey? Story 8. I educate all gut students. When I was a middle school teacher, one of my female pupils came to me and said she needed to use the restroom. In front of the class, she came back and informed me that her period had arrived. Her menstruation had just started. She was at a loss for what to do. She had nothing on and was in excruciating agony. The blood was seen coming in. I firmly instructed her to see the nurse. I am a 28-year-old homosexual man who is still completely ignorant of how periods function. And to my student Brittany, it's okay to squirm at the thought that you informed 20 other students, including your homosexual instructor, that you began your journey toward femininity as a result of you. I keep notepads at my desk. Story 9. When I was a high school teacher, a young brat called Austin learned that I was turning 45 and began lecturing the class on how I should be sure to have a colonoscopy since I was now that old. Story 10. This is a college student. In my police investigations, a classmate. Morse is the granddaughter of the teacher. When the teacher asked what kind of evidence would be left behind after a sexual assault one day, the granddaughter raised her hand and responded, "Dan, from saliva." Her granddad, the teacher, prompted her to provide more detail. I was appalled when I saw her make the motion of having them in her hand and ripping the box open with her lips. Thus, saliva is a possibility. Evidence. Story 11. During sex education in middle school, the instructor preached abstinence until marriage. A student inquired as to the teacher's virginity as he was unmarried. The instructor found it awkward since he wasn't sure whether the situation was worse. Either accept his hypocrisy or the fact that he was a 40-year-old virgin. He became crimson in the face and gave us an early dismissal. That's fantastic. I recall sitting in sex education in middle school and listening to my P instructor, Mr. Real, discuss limbs and how we should utilize them. Someone posed the question, why should we utilize them? Then he said hesitantly and slowly, because touching skin hurts. I clearly recall seeing the wrinkles on his face. Story 12. One male student in the string ensemble I was leading requested in front of other students if he could study cello because he wanted to play an instrument he could hold between his knees. This incident happened while I was a student teacher at a high school. Story 13. In the grocery. Duct tape, tampons, and motor oil were the only items I had in my basket. He took a glance at my possessions and his eyes became wide. I'm not sure what he thought I would do, but we both pretended it never occurred. The next day, at school, Tale 14. Some background. I work with pupils who have intellectual difficulties. Imagine having an 8-year physicals, yet being a teenager. These youngsters are straightforward and constantly express what is on their thoughts. Little knowledge of social conventions or how to behave in a socially acceptable manner. One of my pupils approaches me and requests a chance to talk with me outside of the classroom. I figured he could be going through something personally and wanted to chat about it, so I consented. He continues by describing me as the sexiest thing he has ever seen. Something needed to be immediately put an end to. He can't say that to me since I'm his instructor, I told him. It's not suitable, etc. Afterwards, he requested a hug. Unlearned lesson? Story 15. A student discreetly informed me in the back of the classroom that she was having trouble focusing and would probably need to miss a significant amount of class time due to a Utah. I checked up with her after class to see how she was doing. I had to find a very tactful approach to remind her to always use protection and to emphasize the value of urinating after sex without really stating such thing. I might have gone into a lot of difficulty since I am a man and it was a conservative community if I had not encouraged abstinence exclusively. All I wanted was to make sure she was safe and educated. Story 16. I'm a middle school teacher. I hope that's enough. A 13-year-old kid asked me last week what occurs when a female turns on. All I could offer was ask a buddy who has experience. I'm going to act as if this just happened. I'm a fresh-faced instructor. Yikes. Story 17. So it's uncomfortable the majority of the time. A student asked me why I had broken up with my longtime partner not long after. It was entertaining that the child knew they had seen me with him throughout town, I promise. The kids then threatened to get him for me. How can reproduction distinguish between living and non-living organisms? A sixth student inquired. Shouldn't the fact that boys cannot reproduce imply that they are not living things? I immediately took the child down to the health teacher. Story 18. For a forthcoming performance, a guy enrolled in a dance class at my school would need to wear skin-tight tights. So in order to tuck everything away neatly, professional male dancers often wear what is referred to as a support, such as a sturdy supporting G-string beneath leggings. Nevertheless, the institution where I work isn't a dedicated dancing school, and there aren't many men among our pupils. I haven't had a problem like this before, so because we had to go to a dance store anyway and knew what to look for. It was arranged that the school would buy the support for him. Call the student's mother awkwardly to explain why his professors bought him a G-string. Story 19. I'm a young, inexperienced instructor with a high school pupil who is nearly too old for it. 21. One day he was being like a jerk, so I was really stern with him. He then said, I know why you're so grouchy today. Your lover hit you, which has made you angry. Then as I brought him to the principal, he shouted at me the whole time and demanded that I explain his situation. He was almost my age, and that made me very uncomfortable, since it was obvious he didn't respect me as a teacher. His remarks crossed the line, and he was expelled from my class as a result. Story 20. A young guy in his 20s is the college's current instructor. The popular girls in my class are always calling his name for assistance, but sometimes they are just calling him for attention and calling him by nicknames. He always reacts awkwardly and says, don't call me that, and then stands awkwardly with a tray face that says, I want to stand over here now. I attend a somewhat small college. There are quite a few well-known individuals at the institution, ranging from those who presumably will be taking it easy to those who snuck out, drink, and make a mess. It differs greatly from the huge institution I attended. Moving to this one can attest that there are no popular or unpopular students at large institutions, but there are in this little campus. About others, I'm unsure. Britain is where I am. Story 21. Over the weekend, I burnt my hands on a hot wax jar, cracking the waterproofing variety as a consequence. When my instructor questioned me why I didn't do my assignment on Monday when I had a bandage on, I replied that I burnt my hand. He queried, Oops, my bad. Why? I answered, warm wax. Now, I used to compete with the other class clown since I was the class clown. Sutalaja, you fool. You're meant to drip the wax for that kink, the other class clown, John, remarked. I answered, John, your room is a disaster. How was I meant to locate the user guide? When the instructor saw that we were ready to disrupt the lesson for a few minutes, she asked us to halt. John said, Mr. H, I've chosen not to. Bellegarde stop won't do anything is his safe bet. Mr. H. John, what? A secure term. Mr. H. Used it as a term. John, that's not how I define a safe term. John, that's not how I define a safe term. John, I claim, crossed him in Mr. H. Tale 22. As my high school class was using the computer lab, two of my peers wanted to return to the classroom since they had forgotten their books. They were given the keys to the class by the instructor, a reasonably gorgeous young blonde. Her phone was on her desk when the two males returned to the classroom. They took it out, read her messages, discovered the one she had sent to her husband, and sent the images to themselves. Then went on to inform every male student of the news. She was unfortunately fired from the school for personal reasons a few weeks later after being found guilty of doing. She was a kind woman who didn't do anything wrong. Therefore, it's a sad tale. Story 23. I filled in for a Spanish class in high school. One day, a female upperclassman who had been alerted that the regular Spanish instructor was absent came to my planning hour. She persisted in making small chat while explaining that she was a teacher's assistant in the gym and wasn't required on this particular day. Purely on instinct exclusively, she appeared a bit too outgoing for someone who had never met me before. I've always felt odd from the beginning. When it was ready for class, I prompted my classroom door to open and didn't really offer her any input. Yet as she spoke on, the conversation became increasingly intimate. She started outlining her departure from her parents' home without prodding. She now resided with 3 college-age boys and gave off the impression of being 16 or 17, and she worked as a waitress at what may have been a strip club. Usually, you wouldn't open up about that to a random substitute teacher you met 5 minutes ago. She then moved on to discuss men's fetishes and how some of the clients she worked with had a thing for expectant mothers. She appeared to be trying to get me to talk about my own interests. That was never going to occur. In most situations, I strive to be a good listener for my pupils, but this one set off the smoke alarms. I quickly left the room after asking where the drinking fountain was, since I already knew where it was but needed an excuse. I didn't come back until my planning hour was through. I left school that day thinking whether I was being too cautious, if I should have reported a girl with a tail like that to the front office, or if it was something going on at home, and thus beyond the school's control. In some ways, it probably puts me at the summit of the awkward teaching mountain. Tale 24. In Japan, I teach English. The principal was monitoring the class on this particular day. We were discussing adjectives with the primary school, aged pupils. I requested that the pupils sketch an image relating to the adjective on the board. Draw for me a thing that is or was large, for instance. When I was given the opportunity, I drew something inexpensive for myself. One pupil sketched a stick person with an afro while others handed me an eraser or some chocolate. Being an American, I naturally freaked out. I had to behave professionally since the principal was there in the space. I questioned the youngster about his artistic choices. He must have read up on slavery in the United States and the wages slave owners receive. Story 25. One of my instructors is young and very lovely, albeit she is not a teacher. I genuinely feel sorry for him. He can only pretend not to notice that the whole student body is constantly gushing over his looks and physique. Story 26. Required. I'm not a teacher, but I had to make a contribution. A very elderly, extremely devout woman led a health sex education lesson. While she didn't approach the drug or mental health unit in a very scientific way, she was able to convey the message well enough for us to pass the exams. She did not feel at ease in the sex education unit, however. In one of her lectures, she essentially described how tadpoles migrate down the urethra and into the female body, where one of them comes across the egg and forms a link with it, and that is how a child is born. Except for this one child, none of us really paid attention since we all knew about sex. Try to picture Raleigh from the Diary of a Wimpy Kid. He naively inquired as to how the tadpoles reached the egg. The instructor looked at us in the hopes that someone would provide an explanation. Yet everyone in the room agreed to support his argument while seeing her wriggle. She then stood there while holding her crucifix, trembling and necklace. You see the tadpoles then, the male that is. Obviously he must. So he implanted the dog in the lady, so on. That was rather comical. Yet scientists now understand how tadpoles reach the egg. Another narrative from the defenseless youngster is the runner-up for this class. Vasectomy procedures and tube lawsuits were topics of discussion. Yeah, sure, both of my parents had those procedures, but I was still born, the young man explains. I was a fortunate incident. The lecture took some time to get back up. Story 27. Here is a tale that happened long ago when I was still a student and not employed by the school, but I was still teaching music and other things. One student who was homosexual but came from a highly devout home found various ways to express himself, mostly via acting and theatrical classes that doubled as improv classes and creative writing. The situation started approximately a year ago, but the crucial moment came when he chose to make his most recent book available. This was basically sensual French literature, and the two main characters reminded me and another student a lot of ourselves. The article made clear what kinds of information it did not include. To make things interesting, a kink was added. Now that I wasn't a school employee, but rather a clinician using the facilities for teaching, I was in the fortunate position of being able to deny seeing it and hoping that the management of the school wouldn't bring me into the conversation. I just kept my head down and let the situation pass. Yet other youngsters just never quite moved on from it, and they would jokingly mock me about it. The fan fiction was awfully written, and I was near enough in age to fire back. Well, yes, there's a hot adventure into a homosexual high school student's suppressed desire somewhere out there, including myself as a terrific power bottom.